All right. Welcome, everybody. I'm making this for YouTube using the Zoom platform. I don't think anybody's joining me. I just decided on the spur of the moment to make the class. Basically, what I did is I downloaded the Art Scroll app and I bought the Safer. It's called the Chofetz Chaim lists 17 prohibitions that one may conceivably violate by speaking negatively about his fellow Jew. Okay, so on the Art Scroll, it's cheaper if you buy it on your phone, but you can only buy it one at a time. It's kind of dumb. But what I've been doing is you can't even see it on here. I would download the book. And if I want it on another device, I just screenshot it and WhatsApp it to the other device, whatever thing I'm talking about. Hopefully you don't have to lose it twice and then not have it. Chofetz Chaim now lists 17 prohibitions that one may conceivably violate by speaking negatively about his fellow Jew. He begins with the basic prohibition against speaking rechilus and lashon hora, which is evil talk. Hamragel bachaveroi oiver beloy saaseh. One who gossips about his fellow transgresses a negative commandment. Shne'emar, as it states, Lo selech rachil be'amecha. Do not go as a talebearer among your nation. This is from Vayikra 19:16. Ezehu rachil. Who is a talebearer? Zeh shetoyez devarim behoilech mizeh lazeh ve'omer. The term rachil generally means a peddler. And here this is a reference to someone. They had an example of Reuben who peddles negative information by going from one person to another, Shimon, and says to him, Kachamar Peloini Alecha. So and so, Levi said the following. I think it's just saying these names are just examples. So Reuben, for example, tells to Shimon that Levi said the following negative thing about you. Kach v'chach shemati al Peloini shehu asa lecha. Or Reuben says to Shimon, I heard that Levi did the following harmful thing to you, or so and so. They're all examples. And in this manner, Reuben causes strife between Shimon and Levi. Reuben is called a rachil, a talebearer, and he is in violation of this negative commandment. Do not go about as a rachil. So one that speaks lashon hora about another person is called a rachil. Even if what Reuben says about Levi is true, he has still violated the prohibition against speaking rechilus. And by doing so, he is destroying the world. It's funny, many times someone will start speaking bad things, and the person not wanting to hear the lashon hora will say, I don't want to hear lashon hora. But then the person will say, but it's true. And that's exactly why it's lashon hora. The very fact that it's true is actually called lashon hora. Especially since it's true. He has still violated the prohibition against speaking rechilos, and by doing so, he is destroying the world. Wow. The Chofetz Chaim is saying here that when you speak lashon hora wicked about another person, you are literally destroying the world. I remember learning in Chassidus that when you do a mitzvah, you're being a partner with Hashem in creating the world. So that would for sure mean that if by Jews doing mitzvahs help Hashem in creating the world, then doing averas, they're destroying the world. And if Lashon Hora and not having Ahavas Yisrael is one of the most grave sins, then you must be destroying the world when you speak Lashon Hora. The Chofetz Chaim adds that this verse refers not only to Rechilus, but also to Lashon Hora. There is yet another sin that is far worse than this. Behu Lashon Hora. And that is Lashon Hora. Hu bichlal love zeh. And it too is included in this prohibition of do not go as a talebearer. Now, what could be worse than Lashon Hora, but it's also included with Lashon Hora and Rechilus, being a talebearer. Behu hamasaper bignus chaveroi. This sin of Lashon Hora refers to one who speaks disparagingly about his fellow to others, af al pi she'omer emes, and it applies even if the speaker is speaking the truth. The Chofetz Chaim introduces a third category of forbidden speech included in this verse. Avol ha'omer sheker. However, if one relates false information about another person, Nimsa moitzi shemra al chavedroi, he is deemed to be a motzi shemra. Example, one who puts out false rumors about his fellow, and his sin is even greater. The Chofetz Chaim cites a second prohibition that refers to both Lashon Hora and Rechilus. Whereas the previous verse refers only to the speaker, the following prohibition applies to the listener as well. Hey there, Name Hamsaper Oi Hamkabel Beloved Deloy Sisa. Shema Shav. One who speaks or accepts Lashon Hora also violates the prohibition, do not accept a false report. According to its standard vowelization, the word sisa, pronounced sisa, means accept unkelis. He's a commentary in the Gemara, Ibid. So this verse thus prohibits a person to listen to and accept a Lashon Hora or Rechilus report. So we're learning in Hayom Yom that Lashon Hora affects three people. What are the three people affected? The Frierdiker Rebbe and Hayom Yom. I wish I knew which day it was. Maybe people can put in the commentary. But Lashon Hora kills three people. The one speaking Lashon Hora, I mean, you're doing a major avera, and doing averas literally kill you. The one listening to the Lashon Hora is right here. It's doing the avera of accepting a false report or whatever. Well, listening to Lashon Hora is the person that's listening to Lashon Hora is being killed, and the person that they're speaking about is being killed too, because when you speak Lashon Hora, evil talk about somebody, you're bringing about their negative qualities, and if you bring about someone's wicked sins, it'll spiritually give the klipos, the power of impurity, more power for the person to keep doing the sin. So there you have it. That's three people that are killed when you speak Lashon Hora. Kavrebe name loi sasi. However, the Gemara Pesachim 118a teaches that the word sisa could be exegetically vowelized as sasi, which is pronounced sasi, meaning cause to accept. So if you're speaking Lashon Hora and you're telling someone else the information about what someone else said, or about someone else, you're causing someone else to accept the bad report. Currently, this prohibition includes both the listener and the speaker. For while the listener is one who accepts the report, the speaker is the one who causes the listener to accept the report. A third prohibition that refers to both Lashon Hora and Rechilus. Be'oiver name hamsaper b'ma dichsi. Who speaks Lashon Hora also transgresses that which is written. Hisha nega hatzaras lishmor be'oid v'la sois. Take heed of the tsaros affliction, to be very careful and to act accordingly. Devarim 24:8. Ufershu besifra dema shekasav shekasiva hatayra lishmor me'oid. The Chazal explained in Shifra Bechukosai 1:3 that when the Torah writes the seemingly extra phrase, to be very careful, hakavona sheloi lishkoyach milhizaher milashon hara. It means that you should not forget to remain vigilant against speaking Lashon Hora. Sheloi savoy alecho hatzaratzas al yedei sipur hazeh, so that you will not be afflicted with saras on account of this Lashon Hora account. I believe it's the Parsha Tazria. When we learn this Parsha Tazria, and I think there's even a thing on Metzora. One that spoke Lashon Hora would get leprosy. They get all these blemishes on their skin, and it was a real mess. And also, they'd have all these deformities on their body and the skin. And also, one that spoke Lashon Hora, they would have big blotches all over their walls, some type of markings, almost like leprosy for a house. And if the person did tshuva, they would merit when they ripped out the wall, there would be gold or something there. But yeah, this is what we're talking about. Saras results primarily as a punishment for speaking Lashon Hora. The Torah is thus instructing us, guard yourself against saras by refraining from speaking Lashon Hora. A fourth prohibition that applies to both Lashon Hora and Rechilus, and to both the speaker and the listener. Be'oiver nami hamsaper ve'hamikabel beloved delivne iver loy sitain michshoil. One who speaks or accepts Lashon Hora also violates the prohibition. You shall not place a stumbling block before the blind. In Vayikra 19:14, which prohibits one Jew from causing another Jew to sin. Ki ko echad noisein michshoel livnei chaveiroi. in that each one, both the speaker and the listener, is placing a stumbling block before his fellow. Sheyavor al Oirashin Batera, by causing him to transgress prohibitions that are explicit in the Torah. When Reuven relates Lashon Hara to Shimon, he causes Shimon to violate the prohibition against listening to Lashon Hara. And Shimon, in turn, by listening to Reuven's report, facilitates Reuven's prohibition against speaking Lashon Hara. Thus, Reuven and Shimon are both in violation of Livnei Iver, since each is the cause of the other one's sin. The Chofetz Chaim notes that when there are multiple listeners, there is a difference between the listeners and the speaker with regard to the application of Livnei Iver. Av yesh chiluk bein hamisaper v'hamikabel bazeh. There is, however, a difference between the speaker and the listener in this regard. Hamisaper oiver belovze bein im hashoimim rabim oi mu'atim. This is because the speaker transgresses this prohibition of Livnei Iver, regardless of whether there are many listeners or only a few, since he is causing them to violate their prohibition against listening to Lashon Hara. The fact there are so many listeners does not detract from the speaker's violation of Livnei Iver. Ve'adraba kol sheyisrabu hashoimim. For on the contrary, the more listeners there are present, Yisrabe alav hazeh, the more transgressions of this prohibition of Livnei Iver the speaker accumulates. Kihu noisein michshoel Livnei kama anoshim. When the speaker speaks Lashon Hara in the presence of many, he causes many people to stumble in the prohibition against listening to Lashon Hara. And he thus violates a separate prohibition of Livnei Iver for each listener in his audience who accepts his report. Loichin hamikabel. This phenomenon, however, is not true with respect to the listener. Shivin efshar de'enoi oiver beloved seh. For it is possible that he does not violate this prohibition of Livnei Iver. Rakim hu levadoi shoy meya mimenu ata halashon hara. Oi harchilus. Except when he is a sole listener present. Right. Okay, so it's saying here that the listener isn't causing the speaker to do the Lashon Hara unless there's only one listener speaking. Unless there's only one listener speaking with the Rechilu speaking Lashon Hara. It is possible that he does not violate this prohibition of Livnei Iver except when he is the sole listener present when the speaker relates to Lashon Hara or Rechilus. So that if he were now to leave the presence of the speaker, he would have no one with whom to share his Lashon Hara. In such a case, the listener certainly violates Livnei Iver by giving the speaker an audience, for he has thus caused the speaker to say Lashon Hara. There you have it. If there's one guy trying to speak Lashon Hara to you, and you're the only one he's speaking to, you can say, I don't want to hear it. And as soon as you leave, you cause the speaker to not speak any more Lashon Hara, and you save yourself from doing the aver of listening to the Lashon Hara. In such a case, the listener certainly violates Livnei Ivir by giving the speaker an audience, for he has thus caused the speaker to say Lashon Hora. Aval im yesh biladav shoimim acherim be'etz maseh. However, if there are other listeners present in the Lashon Hora, if there are other listeners present in the Lashon Hora speaker's audience, efshar de'ein oiver hashoimea alav zeh. Then perhaps the listeners do not transgress this prohibition of Livnei Ivir by listening to the Lashon Hora report. Ki al lavin acherim hamefoy rushing bivsicha zoi, but only the other prohibitions enumerated in this section. Nevertheless, if you're amongst a group of people listening to Lashon Hora, you're still violating the fact that you're listening to Lashon Hora. You may not be causing the speaker to speak Lashon Hora, but it's never permitted for one to listen to Lashon Hora. Again, Biver Mayim Chaim. See Be'er Mayim Chaim for further elaboration. The Chofetz Chaim qualifies his previous statement regarding multiple listeners, noting that a listener is sometimes in violation of Livnei Ivir, even though there are other listeners present as well. B'chol ze'im ba'achar hatchalas hasipur. This, however, that a listener does not transgress Livnei Ivir when there are multiple listeners applies only to someone who arrived after the discussion was already underway. Join Shehizchil Lisaper Lifanav. However, the law is different with regard to the first person with whom the speaker began to converse. Av Sheba'u Achar Kach El Hashmua Ara Hazois Uid Anoshim. If, say, Reuben began to report Lashon Hora to Shimon, then even if other people came later to join this wicked discussion, Bivadai Oiver Bechol Gavne. Shimon definitely transgresses Livnei Ivir in any case, despite the fact that there are now multiple listeners. Ki al Yadoi who's Chal Ha'isur. Since it was through Shimon that the transgression of Lashon Hora began in the first place. Shimon is considered the cause of Reuben's Lashon Hora, since the conversation would not have taken place had he not agreed to listen in the first place. Livnei Ivir, even though others joined the conversation later. Chofetz Chaim adds that even if listeners are not in violation of Livnei Ivir when there are multiple listeners present, someone who remains present in the audience of a Lashon Hora speaker is classified as a participant in a wicked assembly. But al kol panim, in any event, even if one does not violate Livnei Ivir when listening to Lashon Hora together with others, Tzarech lehizaher me'oid machavuros ka'ela. One must be very careful not to join such groups of people. Sheloi leishev imahem, and not to sit amongst them. Ki lemayla kulam nichtavin b'shem chavu ras resha. Because in heaven above, the entire group is inscribed as being part of a wicked assembly. There you have it. If you're listening to Lashon Hora in a group, even though you're not the first one to listen to the Lashon Hora, you're joining a wicked assembly, which, as we all know, is against halacha. Ichein isa bitzava as Rabbi Eliezer Hagadol. Indeed, this is what is stated in the ethical will of Rabbi Eliezer Hagadol. This is from Orchos Chaim 55. Shetziva lehoir kinus b'noi v'zeh l'shoinoi. So it's the will of Rabbi Eliezer Hagadol, who instructed his son Horkinus as follows: Di al teshev b'chavuros ha'omrim ginai mechav rehem. My son, do not sit among assemblies that speak ill of their fellow Jews. I kishehad varim oilim lemaila. Because when the words of their conversation ascend above, Basefer Nichtavin, they are recorded in a book. V'chol ha'oimdim sham Nichtavin v'shem chavura rasha. It's present in such an assembly are inscribed as being part of a wicked assembly and will be punished accordingly. I'll wrap it up right now for now, but I think I'm going to start doing this more often. Lashon Hora Shir. I'm about to get the Musar set. It's another Chofetz Chaim, but I'm gonna keep teaching and doing a thing dedicated for Lashon Hora specifically. And this Sunday we're gonna have a share about Ahavas Yisrael. It might get into Lashon Hora depending on the timing. I don't know. I don't know if there will be time because it's going to be specifically about chapter 29 of Shulchan Aruch. Maybe 30 of Shulchan Aruch would just speak the halachas of Lashon Hora. And this year that I want to do every Sunday from 9:30 p.m. on Zoom. We're going to discuss this. Also, chapter 32 of Tanya. It's all about the proper traits a human should have, not speaking Lashon Hora, is how to be a good human being. And Rabbi Chaim Peel is going to help me with this. We're going to have some people Zoom with us, and everybody's free to comment and share what they have to say about it. But I'm hoping an hour and a half every Sunday at 9:30 p.m. We'll take our time, and maybe every day I can just do a little bit of Lashon Hora. Not speak Lashon Hora, chas v'sholom, God forbid, but teach a little about Lashon Hora. This is this book right here. Let's see, on the ArtScroll app. It's actually called Sefer Chofetz Chaim, Volume 1. The laws of Lashon Hora translated and elucidated, including practical illustrations and halachic indexes. So that's basically what I'm doing. And I'm getting a Musar compilation of the Chofetz Chaim in a week or so. And I think it's I think it's important for us Jews to do everything we have and use all our resources to stop anything against lashon hora, speaking bad about someone, true or false, or just not acting proper towards other human beings, or even really animals do that too. The second holy temple was destroyed simply for the fact that there was a lack of a Ahavas Yisrael. One of the biggest things is lashon hora, because that's the easiest one to slip up on. That's why I'm covering it. And my rabbi taught me in yeshiva that if one learns Tanya properly, he will control his brain to not speak lashon hora. And if your mind rules over your heart, then you won't speak lashon hora. But I still think it's good to learn the Chofetz Chaim and learn the Musar about this, because have the will to control your mind over your heart if you don't know how terrible the Avera is to begin with. When you know how devastating it is to do the Avera, then I believe it'll be easier to have your mind rule over your heart. So I think it's good to, when it comes to the Ahavas Yisrael stuff, to learn the Musar with the Chassidus. And then, of course, you need the Nigla of the Shulchan Aruch, because without knowing the law, there's nothing to talk about. It's just like the Talmud. You have the Mishnah, what explains a simple law, and then the Talmud explains everything in depth. So you need the whole package. See everybody. Join me this Sunday, and tomorrow sometime I'm going to try to do another class if anybody wants to join me. Maybe I'll do another class. I'm going to try to do something 9:30 p.m. tomorrow. Everybody have a successful day tomorrow. And if I don't see you, have a good Shabbos.